2016, EgyptAir Flight 804 began what should have been an ordinary journey. The Airbus A320 aircraft departed from Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris, its destination Cairo, the bustling capital of Egypt. The flight was scheduled to take just under 4 hours, a familiar route for the airline and its experienced crew. For the passengers settling in for the overnight trip, there was no indication that this flight would be anything other than routine. The plane ascended into the clear night sky, leaving the lights of Paris behind as it set a course southeast across Europe and over the dark expanse of the Mediterranean Sea. Everything appeared normal, with standard communications and a steady flight path. The aircraft itself was a reliable workhorse of the skies. An Airbus A320 delivered to EgyptAir in November 2003, it had accumulated over 48,000 flight hours, a testament to its dependability in commercial aviation. On that very day, the plane had already completed several successful round trips, flying to Asmara, Tunis, and then to Paris, without any reported major incidents. The pre-flight checks in Paris were completed as per standard procedure, and the plane was cleared for its journey back to Cairo. For the ground crew, pilots and air traffic controllers, Flight 804 was just one of thousands of flights crisscrossing the globe, a seamless part of a massive and intricate network of modern air travel. As the flight progressed through the night, it crossed Italian and Greek airspace without issue. The pilots maintained regular professional contact with air traffic controllers on the ground, reporting their position and altitude as expected. The journey was smooth, flying at a cruising altitude of 37,000 feet, well above any potential weather disturbances. The passengers were likely asleep or resting, anticipating their arrival in Egypt in the early morning hours. The calm inside the cabin mirrored the calm reported from the cockpit. There were no signs of trouble, no warnings, and no reason for anyone to believe that danger was imminent. The flight was proceeding exactly as planned, on time, and on course. But just as it was about to enter Egyptian airspace, something went terribly wrong. At 2:29 a.m. Cairo time on May 19th, Flight 804 abruptly vanished from radar screens. In a matter of minutes, a routine flight turned into a terrifying mystery. The aircraft, which had been flying steadily just moments before, disappeared without a distress call. The silence from the cockpit was sudden and absolute. Air traffic controllers in both Greece and Egypt tried desperately to re-establish contact, but their calls went unanswered. The plane was gone, leaving behind a void in the sky and a profound question that would launch a massive international investigation and leave the world searching for answers. Aboard Flight 804 were 66 individuals, each with their own story, their own destination, and their own loved ones waiting for them. The manifest included 56 passengers from various walks of life, representing a dozen different nationalities. The largest group consisted of 30 Egyptian citizens, many of whom were returning home to family and friends. Among them were students, business professionals, and families. Also on board were 15 French nationals, their lives tragically intertwined with the fate of the flight. The passenger list also included citizens from the United Kingdom, Belgium, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, Chad, Portugal, Algeria, and Canada, reflecting the global nature of air travel and the diverse community brought together on this single, ill-fated journey. Leading the flight was a dedicated and experienced crew of 10. At the controls was Captain Mohammed Saeed Ali Shukair, a 36-year-old pilot with 6,275 flight hours, a significant portion of which were in the Airbus A320. He was a seasoned professional, trusted by the airline to command the aircraft safely. Sitting beside him was First Officer Mohammed Ahmed Mamdou, a young but capable pilot at 24 years old, who had already logged 2,766 flight hours. Together they formed a competent team in the cockpit. The cabin crew was comprised of flight attendants dedicated to the safety and comfort of the passengers, and uniquely, the flight also carried 3 Egyptian air marshals, a standard security measure on some of the airline's routes. For the families awaiting the arrival of their loved ones at Cairo International Airport, the morning of May 19th began with confusion and then escalated into sheer panic. The flight's scheduled arrival time came and went, but the arrivals board showed only a delay, then nothing at all. Anxious relatives gathered at the airport, desperately seeking information from airline officials. News slowly trickled in, confirming that contact with the plane had been lost. The hope for a simple communication error soon faded. replaced by the grim reality that a major incident had occurred. The faces of waiting mothers, fathers, spouses, and children told a story of heartbreak and disbelief as their world was shattered by the unfolding tragedy. The human toll of the disaster was immense, extending far beyond the 66 lives lost. Each passenger and crew member was part of a larger network of family, friends, and colleagues. There was Richard Osman, a British geologist and father of two, on his way to work for a gold mining company. There was Pascal Hess, a photographer from a small town in France, who had lost his passport just days before the trip. And there were entire families, like an Egyptian couple returning from a medical trip in Paris. Their stories, once full of life and promise, were now part of a tragic mystery, leaving behind a legacy of grief and an enduring search for closure. The final moments of Flight 804 were pieced together not from a pilot's distress call, but from cold, hard data. The last routine communication occurred at 2:26 a.m. Cairo time. The pilot spoke with Greek air traffic controllers as the plane prepared to exit their airspace. His last words were calm and standard, "Good night." There was no hint of alarm in his voice, no indication of any problem on board. Moments later, as the aircraft was handed over to Egyptian air traffic control, it entered a zone of silence. Repeated calls from the ground went unanswered. The pilots never checked in with their Egyptian counterparts, a critical and mandatory step in any flight. Then, the aircraft began a series of bewildering and violent maneuvers. Just after entering Egyptian airspace, the plane, flying at 37,000 feet, made a sudden, sharp 90-degree turn to the left. This was followed almost immediately by a full 360-degree turn to the right. During these erratic movements, the aircraft began to plummet from the sky. It descended rapidly, losing over 22,000 feet of altitude in just a couple of minutes before it finally disappeared from radar screens at an altitude of about 15,000 feet. Such maneuvers are highly unusual and point to a catastrophic event inside the aircraft, suggesting the pilots had either lost control or were desperately trying to regain it. While the pilots remained silent, the aircraft's own systems began sending out automated alerts. The Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System, or ACARS, transmitted a series of error messages to EgyptAir's maintenance base on the ground. These messages painted a grim picture of escalating failures in the cockpit. At 2:26 a.m., the system reported smoke in a forward lavatory, located directly behind the cockpit. A minute later, another message indicated smoke in the avionics bay, the compartment beneath the cockpit that houses the plane's electronic brains. These alerts suggested a fire was spreading near the front of the aircraft. The sequence of failures continued to cascade rapidly. Following the smoke alerts, the ACARS system reported faults with the cockpit window systems, the flight control system, and finally, the main computer that manages the plane's operations. Within a span of about 3 minutes, the aircraft went from a state of normal flight to a cascade of critical system failures, culminating in its disappearance. The lack of a mayday call from the experienced pilots remains one of the most haunting aspects of the mystery. It suggests that whatever happened was so sudden and overwhelming that it left them no time to communicate their emergency to the world below. The moment Flight 804 vanished from radar, a massive and urgent search and rescue operation was launched. The initial search area was a vast expanse of the eastern Mediterranean Sea, located about halfway between the Greek island of Crete and the Egyptian coast. Egyptian and Greek military forces were the first to respond, dispatching naval ships and aircraft to scour the dark waters. They were soon joined by teams from France, the United States, and other allied nations, all converging on the suspected crash site. The international cooperation underscored the gravity of the situation as the world watched and waited for any sign of the missing plane. Early reports were fraught with confusion and false hope. At one point, Greek officials reported finding debris including life vests and plastic materials, but these findings were later retracted after it was determined they did not belong to the Airbus A320. One Greek ship captain in the area reported a dramatic sighting, a huge ball of fire in the sky, around the time the plane disappeared. A clue that suggested a mid-air explosion or a catastrophic fire. But without physical evidence, this remained just one piece of a complex puzzle. The search teams worked around the clock, battling the uncertainty of the deep sea and the immense pressure to find survivors, although hopes for that faded with each passing hour. Within days, the search began to yield its first grim results. On May 20th, the Egyptian military announced the discovery of the first confirmed wreckage. Search teams found small pieces of the aircraft, personal belongings, and human remains floating in the water approximately 180 miles north of the Egyptian city of Alexandria. The discovery confirmed the tragic fate of all 66 people on board and helped narrow the search area for the most critical pieces of evidence, the aircraft's 2 black boxes. Finding these recorders was paramount, as they held the only real promise of explaining what had happened in the flight's final, terrifying minutes. The search then shifted to a deep-sea recovery mission. The Mediterranean Sea in that region can reach depths of over 10,000 feet, making the recovery operation incredibly challenging. Specialized ships equipped with sonar and underwater robots were brought in to scan the seabed. For weeks, the teams painstakingly mapped the ocean floor, searching for the faint pings emitted by the black box beacons. Finally, in mid-June, their efforts paid off. Both the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder were located and retrieved from a depth of nearly 3,000 meters. Though damaged, they represented the best hope for solving the mystery of Flight 804. The recovery of the 2 black boxes was a major breakthrough, but, honestly, the challenge was far from over. Both the cockpit voice recorder, which captures sounds from the cockpit, and the flight data recorder, which logs thousands of aircraft parameters, were significantly damaged from the impact and prolonged immersion in salt water. They were carefully transported to Cairo for analysis under the supervision of the Egyptian-led investigation committee, which included representatives from France's Bureau of Inquiry and Analysis for Civil Aviation Safety, or BEA. The delicate process of repairing the memory units and extracting the precious data began immediately, with the world anxiously awaiting the secrets they held. The flight data recorder was the first to yield its information. The data it contained was consistent with the automated ACARS messages sent from the plane just before it crashed. It confirmed the presence of smoke in both the forward lavatory and the avionics bay, validating the initial indications of a fire near the front of the aircraft. The FDR also showed a rapid and catastrophic loss of system functionality, corroborating the timeline of cascading failures. The data provided a technical play-by-play of the aircraft's final moments, but did not, on its own, reveal the initial cause of the smoke or the subsequent system breakdowns that doomed the flight. Attention then turned to the cockpit voice recorder, which held the potential to reveal the human side of the tragedy. After extensive repairs, investigators were able to listen to the audio from the flight's final minutes. The recording captured a conversation between the pilots that was routine and calm up until the moment the disaster began. Then, the CVR revealed the chilling sound of a fire. Investigators could hear one of the pilots mentioning the word fire, confirming that the crew was aware of the blaze. The recording ended abruptly, suggesting the fire or a subsequent event quickly incapacitated the pilots and destroyed the plane's electrical systems. The CVR also contained other crucial and later controversial auditory clues. Investigators reported hearing a hissing sound, which some experts would later interpret as the sound of high-pressure oxygen leaking from a pilot's emergency mask. Furthermore, the audio seemed to capture the distinct sound of a lighter being used in the cockpit. These sounds, combined with the mention of a fire, began to form the basis for one of the leading theories about the crash. The black boxes had provided invaluable evidence, but instead of leading to a single clear conclusion, they opened the door to 2 very different interpretations of the disaster. One of the 2 primary theories that emerged to explain the demise of Flight 804 was that of a deliberate, catastrophic explosion. This theory was championed primarily by the Egyptian-led investigation team. In December 2016, several months after the crash, Egyptian authorities made a startling announcement. They stated that their forensic analysis of human remains recovered from the crash site had revealed traces of explosives. This finding fundamentally shifted the direction of their investigation from an accident to a potential act of terrorism. The presence of explosive residue suggested that a bomb may have been smuggled on board the aircraft, either in Paris or during a previous stop. The Egyptian investigators argued that the evidence from the crash scene was more consistent with an explosion than a fire. They pointed to the rapid and complete destruction of the aircraft, which vanished from radar in just a few minutes without a distress call. A fire, they contended, would likely have developed more slowly, giving the experienced pilots more time to react, fight the fire, and communicate with air traffic control. The wide debris field, scattered over a large area of the sea, also supported the idea of a mid-air breakup caused by a powerful explosive force, rather than an impact with the water following an in-flight fire. This theory gained traction in the context of the geopolitical climate at the time. Just 7 months earlier, in October 2015, a Russian passenger jet had been blown out of the sky over Egypt's Sinai Peninsula by a bomb planted by an affiliate of the Islamic State. That attack killed all 224 people on board and raised global concerns about airport security in the region. The similarities between the two events, a flight departing from an Egyptian-related carrier being destroyed mid-flight, led many to suspect that Flight 804 was another tragic victim of terrorism. The Egyptian government, treating the case as a criminal matter, proceeded under this assumption. However, the explosion theory was not without its challenges. No terrorist group ever claimed responsibility for downing Flight 804, a stark contrast to the Sinai bombing, where ISIS was quick to boast of its involvement. Furthermore, detailed security screenings of all passengers, crew, and ground staff in Paris revealed no credible links to extremist groups. The automated ACARS messages, which indicated smoke and a sequence of system failures over several minutes, also seemed to contradict the idea of a single, instantaneous explosion. An explosion would likely have destroyed the plane's systems all at once, not one by one. These inconsistencies left the theory open to significant debate. In direct contrast to the Egyptian theory of an explosion, French investigators from the BEA developed a different conclusion based on the same evidence. They believed the crash was caused by a sudden, intense fire that broke out in the cockpit. The French report, released in 2018, focused heavily on the meticulous timeline provided by the ACARS messages and the black box data. They argued that the sequence of events, smoke in the lavatory, then smoke in the avionics bay, followed by a cascade of system failures, was the classic signature of a spreading electrical fire, not a bomb. The BEA's investigation pinpointed a potential and highly specific origin for such a fire, a leaking oxygen mask in the cockpit combined with a source of ignition. Their analysis of the aircraft's maintenance records revealed something concerning. Just days before the crash, the co-pilot's oxygen mask had been serviced. French investigators suspected that the mask's pressure setting may have been improperly left in the emergency position, causing highly flammable pure oxygen to leak silently into the cockpit. The hissing sound heard on the cockpit voice recorder was presented as key evidence supporting this oxygen leak hypothesis. The source of ignition, according to the French theory, was tragically mundane. EgyptAir was one of the last major airlines that still permitted its pilots to smoke in the cockpit. The sound of a lighter, reportedly heard on the CVR just before the fire broke out, provided a plausible trigger. A spark from a cigarette or a lighter, combined with an oxygen-rich environment, could have ignited a flash fire. This fire would have been incredibly hot and fast-moving, quickly overwhelming the pilots and destroying the critical electronic systems housed in the avionics bay directly below their feet, explaining the rapid loss of control and communication. This theory neatly explained the sequence of ACARS alerts and the sounds on the CVR. It also accounted for why the pilots were unable to send a distress call, as they would have been instantly incapacitated by the ferocity of the blaze. The French investigators contended that the traces of explosives found by the Egyptians could have been the result of contamination during the recovery process, or were not conclusive enough to prove a bomb. They argued that the totality of the evidence from the aircraft's own systems pointed overwhelmingly toward a tragic accident born from a fatal combination of a maintenance issue and human action. The starkly different conclusions reached by the Egyptian and French authorities led to a significant rift and a deadlock in the investigation. The two countries, which had initially collaborated in the search and recovery effort, found themselves at odds over the fundamental cause of the crash. Egypt stood firm on its conclusion that an explosive device was responsible, treating the case as a criminal act of terrorism. They cited the forensic evidence of explosive traces on victims as their primary proof, and formally handed the case over to their public prosecutor, effectively halting the technical safety-focused investigation. France, on the other hand, remained convinced that a fire in the cockpit was the most probable cause. The BEA publicly disagreed with the Egyptian findings, stating that their extensive analysis of the flight data and cockpit voice recordings did not support the explosion theory. They argued that the sequence of events was medically and technically consistent with a fire. This disagreement was not just a technical dispute, it had diplomatic and legal ramifications. By classifying the event as a criminal matter, Egypt was able to withhold key evidence from foreign bodies including the BEA, citing national sovereignty and the confidentiality of an ongoing criminal probe. This divergence created an unprecedented situation in modern air crash investigation, where international cooperation is the standard. The BEA accused the Egyptian authorities of a lack of transparency and a failure to follow established international protocols for air safety investigations, which prioritize identifying the cause to prevent future accidents. Egypt, in turn, defended its position, asserting its authority over an incident that occurred in its airspace and involved its national airline. Offers from other international bodies like the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board to assist and mediate were reportedly rejected, further isolating the investigation. As a result, the official inquiry reached a stalemate. The Egyptian criminal investigation has to this day not produced any public charges or identified any suspects, leaving the terrorism theory unproven. Meanwhile, the French safety investigation concluded with its fire theory but was unable to make its findings internationally binding without Egyptian agreement. This investigative schism has left the families of the victims caught in the middle, without a single, unified, and definitive explanation for the loss of their loved ones. The two conflicting narratives exist in parallel, creating confusion and preventing the full closure that a conclusive report would provide. Years after EgyptAir Flight 804 plunged into the Mediterranean Sea, the sky remains unsettled, and the tragedy remains fundamentally unresolved. Today, on June 9, 2025, the official cause of the crash is still a matter of international dispute. The families of the 66 passengers and crew are left without the closure that comes from a definitive answer. Was it a malicious act of terror, as Egyptian authorities maintain, or was it a tragic accident? A perfect storm of technical failure and human factors, as French investigators believe. The absence of a consensus has allowed uncertainty to fester, turning a quest for truth into a source of ongoing pain and frustration. Many critical questions linger. If it was a bomb, who planted it, and how did it get past the robust security measures at Paris's Charles de Gaulle Airport? The lack of any claim of responsibility by a terrorist organization continues to cast doubt on this theory. If, on the other hand, it was a fire, can we be certain about its origin? Was the oxygen mask truly leaking, and was a cigarette the definitive ignition source? Without a final, unified report, these questions remain in the realm of probability and competing theories rather than established fact, hindering efforts to implement specific safety lessons that could prevent a similar disaster. The legacy of Flight 804 extends beyond the loss of life. It serves as a stark reminder of the challenges that can arise in international air crash investigations. The established protocols of cooperation, designed to prioritize air safety above all else, broke down. The conflict between a national criminal investigation and an international safety inquiry created a deadlock that has yet to be broken. This case highlights the complexities that emerge when aviation disasters become entangled with national security concerns, legal jurisdiction, and diplomatic tensions, potentially obscuring the technical truth that investigators work so hard to uncover for the sake of future travelers. Ultimately, the story of Flight 804 is one of profound loss compounded by unanswered questions. The 66 souls who boarded the plane for a routine flight from Paris to Cairo became victims of a mystery that endures to this day. While the search for debris has long since ended and the black boxes have told their fragmented story, the final chapter remains unwritten. For the families, for the aviation community, and for the public, the search for a conclusive truth continues. Until that truth is found and agreed upon, Flight 804 will be remembered not only as a tragedy, but as a haunting and unresolved puzzle in the history of modern aviation.